Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the deep dive, where we take your source material and really try to distill the instructional core, cutting straight to what matters. And today, you've handed us a short, but wow, an extraordinarily vigorous psalm. We're looking at Psalm 52, and we're seeing it through the commentary of Charles Spurgeon in the Treasury of David.
That's right. And our source material gives us this really focused look at David's response to one of the darkest betrayals of his early life.
Pretty grim.
It is. So our mission today is to unpack David's really heated denunciation of the wicked, and specifically this man named Doeg the Edomite.
Right.
And then we'll draw out the radiant contrast between that temporal malice and David's, his radical, continuous confidence in God's perpetual goodness. It's a very short text, but, every single line is just loaded with insight into divine justice and human corruption.
And this isn't just poetry, is it? This is a reaction to immediate, bloody tragedy. We absolutely have to set the historical context before we can really feel the Psalm's full force.
We do. And the title itself gives us a lot of instruction before we even hit verse 1. It says, "To the chief musician, Maschil, a psalm of David."
Okay.
That first line, addressing the chief musician, it means this vigorous text, this intense rebuke, was deemed worthy of the very best musical arrangement and presentation in the tabernacle.
So even the hard stuff, the judgment, was part of formal worship.
Exactly. It suggests that even the harshest realities of sin and judgment should be subjects of careful, elevated attention when presented to God's people.
And that designation, Maschil, that's crucial here.
Right? Oh, absolutely. It's what transforms this, this poem of what could feel like personal vengeance into something useful for us thousands of years later.
So what does Maschil mean exactly?
It means it's an instructive composition. It signals that even the most malicious acts, the treachery of a man like Doeg, can furnish necessary moral and spiritual lessons. David was the primary target of Doeg's specific hatred, which makes him the most fitting person to extract that lesson. He suffered the malice, and now he is turning that suffering into systematic instruction for the church.
Okay, so let's nail down that specific historical moment. This psalm is tied directly to the incident where Doeg betrayed the priests at Nob.
It was a disaster. A total disaster. Saul had ordered the capture of David, and David, desperate and fleeing, he came to the city of Nob, where the priests were.
Right.
And he convinced the high priest, Ahimelech, to give him the sacred bread and Goliath's sword.
And Doeg the Edomite, he's just there.
It is. He's described as the chief of the herdsmen that belonged to Saul, and he just happened to be there, detained before the Lord. He witnessed the entire interaction.
And that observation became a death warrant for 85 priests and their entire families.
Precisely. Doeg went straight to Saul and reported, "David has come to the house of Ahimelech." Now, here's the thing. While helping David, who was declared a rebel by Saul, was technically a crime.
Sure, you could see that.
The source material makes it clear that the priests did not know that David was fleeing Saul. They acted out of mistaken goodwill.
So Doeg's report was deceitful.
It was deceitful not because it was factually untrue, David was there, but because Doeg delivered the information with an intent to facilitate mass murder. He weaponized a partial truth, knowing it would provoke Saul's paranoia.
Wow. So David, when he hears about this catastrophe, he recognizes the sheer villainy of Doeg. And this psalm is his burning response to that.
It is. It's a condemnation of calculated malice where hatred for God's people is hidden under this veneer of administrative loyalty. And that context gives us all the fire we need to understand verse 1.
Okay, let's unpack this opening verse then. It starts with this immediate challenge, directed at a man David grants the title to, but, he strips it of all its honor. "Why boasteth thyself in mischief, O mighty man?"
Yeah, the irony is immediate, and it is scathing. Doeg's great deed was procuring the slaughter of defenseless priests. What kind of mighty man boasts about murdering unarmed clergy?
Right. It's ridiculous.
David uses this language to mock him, contrasting the honorable title with the utterly despicable nature of the action. It is the ultimate statement of misplaced pride. Doeg should have been hiding in shame for his cowardice, and yet he had the audacity to exult in his loyalty to Saul.
It's almost a theological sarcasm, isn't it? As if David is saying, if this is what makes you mighty, then the word has completely lost all its meaning.
Exactly. The honorable designation, that which belongs to a jubber, a strong, valiant man, is completely consumed by the cruelty of the deed. And our sources suggest that if David was also thinking of King Saul in this address, the tone shifts just a little bit. It moves from pure sarcasm directed at Doeg to more of a pitying observation of Saul's degradation.
How so?
Well, if it's directed at Saul, David is asking, how can a man originally fitted by God for truly noble, kingly deeds descend to such a low level as to find a theme for boasting in such a heartless and petty slaughter?
It highlights how far a man can fall.
Right, when he uses God-given strength, whether it's physical, political, or financial, for wicked mischief. It's the tragedy of strength divorced from righteousness.
And that sets up the pivot point, which arrives almost jarringly in the middle of the first verse.
Yeah.
It's the absolute contrast to all this temporal wickedness. The goodness of God endureth continually.
This is the immovable anchor of the entire psalm. I mean, it's really the foundation of David's faith. The fury of the tyrant, whether that's Doeg or Saul, is a finite, temporary thing, a flash of anger, a moment of triumph.
Yeah.
But God's mercy, his faithfulness, his goodness, that is a perennial stream. It is constant, continuous, and perpetual.
So even when David sees the high priest murdered, his entire world seemingly falling apart, he doesn't despair. He looks past the temporal defeat to the sovereign reality.
That's the key theological move, isn't it? David reasons, even if the servants of God are slain, their master lives. If Doeg succeeds today, the Lord will outlive Doeg. He will outlive Saul, and he will certainly right every wrong committed against his covenant people.
And that knowledge has to fundamentally alter how we, as observers, react to the temporary success of the wicked.
It has to. When we see the wicked seemingly triumph, maybe through deceit or administrative malice, we're supposed to hold that thought. Their success is finite, but God's goodness is eternal.
It modifies their proud exultations.
It does. They can boast in the temporary destruction they manage, but while the eternal God lives, their iniquity has no true lasting cause for exaltation. We look at the temporal triumph through the lens of God's perpetual decree, knowing the end of the story is already written by his unchanging goodness. That constant goodness is the rock David builds his confidence on.
And then David moves from the general boast to the specific instrument of the treachery in verse 2. Thy tongue deviseth mischiefs.
And this shifts the focus to the calculated nature of Doeg's sin. He wasn't just speaking carelessly. His tongue devised mischiefs. This implies planning, calculation, forethought.
So it's premeditated.
Completely. Doeg's communication with Saul appeared helpful on the surface, reporting necessary information to the king. But the genuine ulterior motivating force in his heart was hatred for the priests and, by extension, hatred for the God they served.
That distinction, the appearance of legality versus the actual malice, that's often the mark of the most dangerous forms of wickedness, isn't it? When evil clothes itself in official procedure.
It absolutely is. The source notes that it's a mark of profound spiritual corruption when the evil spoken is craftily intended to promote a yet greater evil. It's the concealed dagger of administrative evil. He didn't rant, he reported, but the report was designed for maximal destruction.
Which leads to that memorable, chilling analogy that truly captures the nature of this calculated cruelty. Like a sharp razor, working deceitfully.
That razor analogy is just spectacular for its specificity. The tongue is rendered effectual for mischief because it's so swift and subtle. The imagery initially draws from Oriental barbers who worked softly and deftly. They can harm or embarrass someone, for instance, shaving off hair completely, while the victim remains calm, entirely unaware they are being operated on to their detriment. That's subtle, stealthy harm.
But our sources suggest a much darker, more lethal application of this analogy, something that elevates Doeg's malice beyond just stealth.
Yes. The stronger, more terrifying image is that of a barber cutting a man's throat very speedily under the pretense of shaving him.
Wow.
The razor is sharp, but the hand that wields it is deceitful. Doeg delivered his information smoothly, with apparent loyalty and respect for the king, but it was a keen, base, and thoroughly effective cruelty. It was a malice that had been whetted by hatred and expertly guided by craft.
So he executed his cruel work with, this accursed thoroughness, hiding the murder within the guise of routine, loyal communication.
Exactly. So we're not talking about rash anger or a clumsy mistake. We're talking about surgical malice that uses a pretext of helpfulness to inflict fatal damage.
It is calculated destruction.
It is. And when a person uses their speaking capacity, or in modern terms, their keyboard or their platform, with apparent helpfulness or neutrality, but the intent is always to destroy the reputation or existence of another, they are using a sharp razor, working deceitfully. This is why David recognized it as such a severe spiritual illness.
David continues to peel back the layers of Doeg's soul in verse 3, showing us the spiritual perversion at the root of it all. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness.
This diagnosis describes a complete inversion of moral affection. Doeg didn't just stumble into evil or admit it into his life reluctantly, he loved it. The spiritual state described here suggests he had a perverse preference for evil, even in situations where choosing good would have been equally advantageous or maybe even more pleasant for him.
So this isn't just moral weakness, this is a moral alignment with destruction.
Absolutely. It's a willful substitution of darkness for light, of evil in the stead of good. His soul was fundamentally bent upon destruction, focused specifically on destroying his neighbors, the priests.
He was more at home with falsehood.
He was. He delighted heartily in lies and spoke the truth only when he couldn't devise a lie quick enough, or, and this is key, when the truth itself could be deployed deceitfully, just like that razor.
And this preference for destruction then translates directly into his rhetorical style. Verse 4 defines the language that comes from this heart. Doeg has a taste, a gusto for evil language, which David calls all-devouring words.
That phrase, all-devouring words, is so visceral. It speaks of language that seeks to consume, to obliterate.
Yeah.
Think of words that swallow men whole, like a predatory animal, or words that rend men to pieces, like a lion. This is furious, bloody oratory designed specifically to excite the lowest, most visceral passions in others, particularly in the angry king, Saul.
It seems like that type of rhetoric is constantly in circulation today. Words designed not to convince, but to dehumanize and destroy.
It's endemic. Evil minds savor this type of oratory because it's efficient at causing chaos and justifying violence. They mistake this pandering to the madness of the wicked, this fury for high-order eloquence.
But the source material draws our attention back to that critical deceit again, right? This furious action is always cloaked with a pretext of justice.
Always. They claim they are jealous for the right, or they are acting out of necessary duty.
Right.
But they are determined to suppress truth and holiness, and they go about it under this transparent pretense of legal or moral authority. They are not merely lying. They are constructing a narrative of righteousness around an action fueled by hatred. The villain here is all-tongue, a man whose entire existence seems dedicated to the destructive power of his speech.
What's fascinating is that the destructive action of Doeg was done entirely through words. He didn't lift the sword himself. He just spoke the words that caused the slaughter.
And that just reinforces the danger David is flagging. The physical strength of the Geber is less destructive than the calculated malice of the deceitful tongue. David, who was a warrior, he knew that the tongue, whetted by malice, can cause far wider and more lasting destruction than any sword he carried. I mean, Doeg's words resulted in the wholesale execution of a whole community.
And this brings us to the first sacred pause, Selah worst. Having seen the malice, the deception, and the spiritual decay, we are instructed to just stop and reflect.
And this pause really lives up to the Maschil title. Doeg the Edomite is history, but the type of man he represents. It persists in every generation.
Sure.
The spiritual reality is that the devil still has his agents, his drovers, as Spurgeon calls them, who seek to hurry the saints like sheep to the slaughter using deceit and devouring words. We have to recognize that the opposition David faced is a perennial pattern of spiritual warfare.
So the Selah is not just a musical notation. It is a command for the listener to take the historical facts and apply the spiritual lesson to their own time. It transforms this study from ancient history into a working manual for recognizing the malice that stalks the church today.
It gives us necessary perspective. We look at the momentary triumph of the wicked, their cunning plans, and we measure it against the eternal, continuous goodness of God. The pause forces us to align our temporal observation with eternal truth before moving on to the declaration of judgment.
Right. And having fully cataloged the wickedness, David then pivots to the declaration of God's inevitable retribution in verse 5. This is where the sovereign hand of God is made explicit. The consequence for seeking to destroy the church is absolute. God shall likewise destroy thee forever.
This is the application of the divine law of correspondence. God measures to malicious men with their own measure. The persecutor sought to destroy the holy community, so God shall destroy the persecutor.
That's total.
It's utter comprehensive vengeance. And to ensure we grasp the totality of this divine action, the psalmist uses 4 distinct, highly descriptive verbs, painting the destruction in the most lively colors possible.
The accumulation of these verbs, each one a different metaphor for ruin, is what makes this passage so striking. Let's break down the layers of destruction. What's the first action? Destroy thee forever.
The Hebrew root here signifies to pull down and break utterly into pieces, like when an altar or a monument is deliberately demolished. It's referenced elsewhere, in Leviticus 14.45, describing the demolition of a house of leprosy.
Okay, so this is the metaphor of a building being razed to the ground.
Exactly. The wicked man constructs his life, his pride, his reputation, his worldly standing, and God comes and pulls it down so violently that one stone is not left upon another. His entire structure is just obliterated.
A complete obliteration of the permanence he tried to create.
Yeah.
The wicked man wants his name to stand, but God just reduces the structure to dust. What's the second action? It seems related, but different.
The second action is take thee away, which is often translated as sweep away. This uses a distinct everyday metaphor of extinguishing the coal or sweeping away the ashes from the hearth. It's an act of thorough removal of something worthless and used up, like dust or chaff. And crucially, the source notes that the expression means not just sweeping him away from his dwelling, but sweeping him away so that he may be no longer a dwelling.
So this isn't just relocation, it's existential removal.
Exactly. It uses the metaphor of a tent or temporary dwelling. It signifies that the entire fabric of his worldly existence, his family, his fortune, his temporal status, is wholly and entirely swept away and dissipated forever. The building is razed, the tent is swept clean, there's no trace left.
And the third action then shifts the metaphor entirely, moving from structures to organic life. Pluck thee out of thy dwelling place.
This action, plucking out, signifies twisting anything, or tearing it up by twisting it around, like a plant forcibly torn from the soil where it grew, or a captive violently dragged from his home. This is the metaphor of the tree being twisted up by the roots.
It speaks of violence and trauma.
It does. Ahimelech and the priests were forcefully cut off from their earthly abode, and now the murderer who contrived their end will similarly be removed, but violently wrenching him away from his security.
It is divine justice mirroring the original crime and severity. If Doeg sought to rip David and the priests out of the land of the living, God will rip Doeg out of his own life source.
Yes, and this leads directly to the fourth and most conclusive action, reinforcing the totality of the judgment. Root thee out of the land of the living. This means extirpation, stubbing him up by the root, cutting him up root and branch.
So where the previous metaphor was about tearing a tree from the soil, this one suggests removal, even from the possibility of growth or return.
It's eradication. He sought the death of others, and death shall fall upon him. He troubled the land of the living with his malice and deceit, and he shall be banished to that place where the wicked cease from troubling. The ethical assertion here is simple and severe. Those who refuse to let live have forfeited their right to live.
When you accumulate these four images, the demolished building, the swept-away tent, the twisted-up tree, and the extirpated root, it becomes impossible for words to express a more entire and absolute destruction. Spurgeon uses these heavy words and mingles the metaphors to paint the picture in the most vivid colors.
And it shows the overwhelming force of divine justice applied against malicious human sin. This isn't just a political defeat, it is a cosmological removal. His physical presence, his social standing, his potential for continuity, all of it is utterly terminated.
And that certainty of destruction is a great comfort to those who feel oppressed by the Doegs of their own era.
It is.
Which gives us the necessary context for the second pause, Zeal of the other. We pause here to reflect on the certainty of this absolute justice.
We behold God's justice proving itself fully capable of dealing with human sin, no matter how calculated or cruel that sin may be. This judgment, while applied to Doeg as a historical figure, prefigures the destruction that awaits the entire world of the ungodly at the last day. The righteous are commanded to pause and take this certainty to heart.
And it's not about finding pleasure in the suffering of the wicked.
No, not at all. It's about finding reassurance in the absolute rectitude of God's sovereignty.
Moving to verse 6, David shows us the vindication of the righteous man, the object of the tyrant's calculated hatred. The righteous shall outlive his enmity, and shall see before his own face the end of the ungodly oppressor.
This is a remarkable observation on providence. God frequently orchestrates events so that the oppressed receive a visible, tangible confirmation of the tyrant's downfall.
Right. We see that with David himself repeatedly.
We do. Mordecai saw Haman hanging. David later received the tokens of Saul's death. And this visible act of justice evokes a necessary twofold reaction in those who are watching.
The first reaction is, and fear.
This is holy awe. It sobers the mind. It's a reverent adoration of the God of providence, recognizing that such swift and complete destruction comes only from the hand of a just sovereign God. It instructs them. It makes them extremely careful to abstain from any designs or crimes of this kind themselves. They learn not to touch the Lord's anointed or his people.
Okay, but the second reaction is far more difficult for the modern mind to grasp, and shall laugh at him. We hear that and we think of personal, vindictive gloating.
And we have to correct that misconception. This is not personal vindictiveness. It is righteous scorn, a laughter of solemn contempt over the wicked man's downfall.
So why are they laughing?
They laugh because the wicked man, Doeg, was so foolish. His schemes were so far-reaching, his plans so deep and politic, yet all were completely thwarted by the divine counterplan.
It's the laughter of seeing the villain become a spectacular failure, despite all his cunning.
Yes. They laugh because he tried to outwit God. The source describes this laughter as deep-seated and more akin to solemnity than merriment. They laugh at the absurdity of human malice trying to defeat the eternal purpose of God. They recognize the poetic irony. The man who thought he held all the cards ended up destroyed by the very thing he trusted.
And this scorn leads directly into the epitaph of the mighty man in verse 7, urging the reader to stop and observe.
Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength.
This is where David applies the divine sarcasm most pointedly. He is calling out, "Look ye here, behold the man, the great vainglorious man, where is he now?"
And the original Hebrew word David is using for man is geber, the very word that signifies a strong, valiant, and influential person.
So he's pointing to the ruins of the Geber who thought he was invincible.
Precisely. His ruin serves as instruction. David is showing everyone that relying on anything other than the eternal God is a fatal error. The man was Geber in name and worldly reputation, but he chose the wrong fortress.
His fatal defining error is then plainly spelled out. But trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in his wickedness.
He found his fortress not in the covenant mercy of the Lord, but in his earthly possessions and his own capacity for mischief. The substance he had gathered, the political influence he had bought, the mischiefs he had successfully wrought, these were his boast and his glory. And this is a constant spiritual warning. It is exceptionally hard to abound in riches and not to place your trust in them. The human heart naturally gravitates towards sinful security upon worldly substance.
And when you combine that worldly trust with a heart already bent toward evil, the resulting figure is particularly dangerous.
Oh, riches and wickedness are dreadful companions. When they join forces, they create a monster. When wealth is controlled by malice, it exacerbates persecution, often heating the furnace 7 times hotter for the child of God. They buy silence, they buy political cover, they buy razors that work deceitfully.
But David reminds us that ultimately, wealth combined with wickedness works out its own destruction.
It does. So when we see someone in the public sphere today who seems immense in substance and great in sin, we should view this verse as the divine in memoriam, anticipating their inevitable end.
We have to view them through the lens of verse 7.
We must, recognizing that their apparent strength is the source of their weakness. They have chosen temporary, finite wealth over perpetual, eternal goodness, and that choice seals their fate. This is the comfort offered to the righteous who have watched the powerful Doegs operate for far too long.
And the psalm concludes with David's brilliant counter-declaration. He moves from the uprooted ruin of the mighty man to his own flourishing stability in verse 8. But I, hunted and persecuted though I am like a green olive tree.
This contrast is just rhetorically and theologically perfect. The wicked man is a razed building, a swept-away tent, an extirpated root. But David, the object of that hatred, even when surrounded by the drought of persecution, is a long-lasting, fruitful, vigorous olive tree. It is a stunning picture of covenant security.
Let's spend some time on this olive tree imagery. It has deep symbolic roots in the Old Testament, representing prosperity and favor.
It does. It is a tree known for its longevity, it can live for centuries, and its continuous fruitfulness. It's also remarkably resilient. The olive tree is famous for drawing sustenance and oil out of the rock and living and growing vigorously, even amid the drought.
Right?
So David is declaring, you think I'm destroyed. No, I am flourishing, drawing life from a seemingly impossible source, God himself, even when my environment is dry and hostile.
And the detail from our source material about the word green is important for accuracy. It doesn't primarily mean green in color, which is often disappointing to travelers who saw the dark or yellowish leaves.
That's a crucial nuance. The word translated green here refers not to hue, but to the vigorous, prosperous, and thriving state of the plant. It means luxuriance and fruitfulness. David is asserting that the health of his spiritual life is independent of his visible temporal circumstances. His vigor comes from his roots, not from the surrounding weather.
And David anchors this prosperity in a specific theological location, in the house of God.
And this requires careful reading. We are not to picture literal olive trees growing in the physical tabernacle courts. Our source material correctly points out that would border on heathen practice and wouldn't be tolerated in Israel's worship.
Okay, so what does it mean?
This phrasing speaks entirely to David's spiritual position and his source of life, not his physical location.
What are the practical implications of being rooted in the house of God for David's security?
Well, there are 4 key things. First, it signifies he is one of the divine family, admitted into the covenant relationship, and therefore cannot be expelled by human malice. Second, he derives all his prosperity, his oil, his fruitfulness, solely from God and God's continuous favor, not from Saul or Doeg or any earthly means.
Mm-hmm.
Third, his spiritual place is near his God, and there he is perpetually safe and happy despite all the machinations of his earthly foes.
And it reinforces the ultimate contrast. Doeg trusted in his place among the mighty, which was fleeting. David trusts in his position as a son in the house of God, which is eternal.
Absolutely. He views himself as a son of God, heir to his promises, while his enemies, the malicious ones, are withered like branches lopped from the tree and just discarded. David is bearing fruit and will continue to do so because he is rooted in the right soil.
This security then culminates in his declaration of ultimate confidence. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever.
And this is the definitive theological difference. The tyrant builds his security on temporal wealth and wicked strength, which are, by definition, finite and subject to demolition, sweeping away, and uprooting. The saint builds his security on the solid rock of eternal, perpetual mercy. David knew God's covenant mercy was unending, and that knowledge provided his present peace and his lasting fortress. This confidence is rooted in the reformed understanding of God's preserving grace. If God's goodness endures continually, then my security in him must also be preserved.
And this certainty naturally leads into the concluding verse, a commitment to perpetual action. I will praise thee forever, because thou hast done it.
David's thankfulness will be as unending as God's mercy. While others boast in their money or their might, David boasts in his God. And what's remarkable here is the perfect tense. Thou hast done it.
Okay, what's the significance to that?
David views his vindication, the punishment of Doeg, and the fulfillment of God's promise as already accomplished, already a fact of divine decree. He is already lifting this sacred psalm for God's memorable acts of providence.
So the present praise is based on a future certainty.
Precisely. It is the language of faith that sees the end from the beginning. David's current suffering does not diminish his praise because he knows the just and sovereign outcome is fixed. But the immediate praise is balanced by a future expectation that requires patience. And I will wait on thy name.
God shall still be the psalmist's hope, even after this victory. He will not look elsewhere for his support or expectation.
The name of God, his revealed character in truth and righteousness, is justly chosen as David's expectation for all the years to come. And furthermore, David intends to wait before or among the saints. He doesn't wait in isolation. He understands that it is good for the entire community, the entire church, to look to the Lord alone for vindication and blessing.
That concept of corporate waiting changes the application entirely. It becomes a communal discipline.
It does. The final practical instruction of the psalm is clear. Let the mighty ones boast in their temporal power, but the righteous must wait on the Lord. We must not allow the fluster and haste of wicked men to disturb our composure.
Right.
If the temporary haste of the wicked brings them momentary honor, our patience, rooted in God's perpetual mercy, will eventually bring us the honor which infinitely excels that temporal glory. We wait because God's timing is perfect.
This has been a necessary, deep examination of one of the sharper texts in the Psalter. The instruction, the Maschil, really shines through clearly. We see the dramatic, eternal contrast laid bare.
We've seen the 2 paths. One path is wickedness, deceit, and trust in temporal wealth, which always leads to withering, destruction, and extirpation, as seen in the uprooted man of verse 7. The other path is divine goodness, security, and fruitfulness, which persists like the flourishing olive tree of verse 8. The security of your outcome is entirely determined by the source of your strength. If you trust in the temporal, you are destroyed. If you trust in eternal mercy, you flourish eternally.
So the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner, is the practical challenge of verse 8. What does it look like in your daily living to be like a green olive tree in the house of God?
Does your life reflect the joy, the vigor, and the usefulness that comes from being rooted in eternal mercy, even when you're surrounded by the devouring words and the spiritual drought of the present day? This psalm gives that certainty. That security is available to all those who patiently wait upon his name, knowing that the final vindication has already been accomplished by God's continuous goodness.
Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. Take this, Maschil, and consider the power of choosing the olive tree over the fading structure of the mighty man. Until next time.